matters. But I'm just so excited to introduce Rishi Jaitley. I've gotten to know Rishi over the last couple of years since he moved to Blacksburg, and we're just so fortunate to have him here. He is an entrepreneur and has been an executive with Google, Twitter, and now OpenAI. And he's just going to talk about the superpower of the future. And currently he is leading the Institute for Leadership in Technology at Virginia Tech. So he literally moved here to Blacksburg to start this institute for the university. So we're extremely excited to have him here, and I'm gonna let him kind of come on up and get started.
All right. Thank you so much, Laura. It's been wonderful getting to know you and the CRC the last couple of years, and great to be with you guys. We'll keep this intimate, and hopefully I'll breeze through this presentation and we can just have sort of a low-key conversation if that works. I think this works. Is this gonna work?
Oh, sorry, you gotta click on it first.
Oh, sorry.
Do like this. Once we click, and then
Now I can use this.
it should work. Yeah, now. Try it.
All right, cool, great. So, the title of my talk is a question that is animating me of late, and it's animated me since before I took on this role at OpenAI. And I think it's an interesting question that I think all of us should ask ourselves, not just as professionals and entrepreneurs, but as parents, as citizens, sort of what in our increasingly cluttered, noisy world, whether we're talking about opportunities to get promotions, raise money, persuade voters, right? We live in a really cluttered world. There's competing events going on, right? Thinking through what a superpower is in that cluttered world, I think is a really interesting question. And it's a question that's been guiding me. And I think my answer might surprise some of you, might not surprise others, but I hope it's the starting point for a fun conversation. First, as indicated earlier, I'm really proud to be here, and I thank Laura and team for having me at the CRC, and it's great to be in this region. A lot of people ask me about my coming to Virginia Tech. As Laura indicated, I've spent my career working for and starting companies in and around what I consider kind of global Silicon Valley. I'm presently a senior advisor at OpenAI, where I've helped the company the last year or so expand into emerging markets in Asia Pacific and beyond. That's kind of been a little bit of my role, and happy to spend a little bit more time on that if you'd like. But that's the kind of the easy way to look at my career. There's been an undercurrent throughout my career that actually has not been about technology. And I think that gets at kind of one of the answers to the question I open with. I think when we think about innovation, when we think about entrepreneurship, we tend to think in technical and commercial terms only. And I think my story and some of the work I'm doing right now, I think complicates that answer a little bit. I've actually spent half my career, notwithstanding all the global Silicon Valley-ness, I've spent half of my career in government and nonprofits and social enterprises. I got my start in education reform in Washington. I lived in Detroit for about a quarter of my career, where my wife is from, starting a bunch of nonprofits I can tell you about. And so I've spent a lot of my career actually in and around NGOs. And a lot of people in technology are confused when they hear that, whether it's at OpenAI, Twitter, or Google, that I'm coming from the nonprofit sector, and are perplexed at the transferability of skills. Here I am sitting around OpenAI's leadership team, and just a few years ago, I was starting a nonprofit in Detroit to empower Black men in hometowns. And a lot of people have trouble connecting the dots. But I think in those dots that when you connect them, you actually see the superpower of the future, which I'll come to in a second. And a lot of my work is, throughout my career has also been about place. I really enjoy place-based work. I think in our increasingly global, virtual, Zoomy world, folks that have an ability to dwell and think about place as a unit of analysis, I think will be particularly cutting and able to break through, and we'll come to that in a second. One of the one of the questions I often get when people ask me about skills and sensibilities and superpowers of the future is, what are your favorite business books, Rishi? What are your favorite self-help books? What are your favorite leadership books? What podcasts do you listen to get better at AI or technology, innovation, and leadership? And my answer is sort of counterintuitive. My favorite book on these themes is The Alchemist, a novel about introspection, about intuition, about soul searching, about searching, actually. And so, and I think part of what I've been trying to do here at Virginia Tech is from here, try to tell a different, offer a different kind of theory around how innovation happens, and you'll get a feel for that in a second. So we live in interesting times. This is a painting I created on OpenAI's DALL-E, probably about a year ago. The barriers to entry, when I was at Google 20 years ago, I used to talk then about how the barriers to entry in and around innovation, creativity, publishing, everything are falling. 10 years ago, with AWS becoming more and more pervasive, barriers to entry fell even further. Now, it's hard to put into words, really, how flat the world truly is. In fact, the book, The World is Flat by Tom Friedman, 07 or 06, is part of the reason I decided to head to Asia Pacific with Google. Biotech is actually a really interesting example of where the world might be headed. The large language models of today have been trained on text. Imagine LLMs trained on protein sequences and what that might do to help predict and prevent diseases like cancer and the like. So this is kind of the context of the world we're living in. Barriers to entry have fallen considerably across really any dimension of the technology and innovation ecosystem. One of the things I was thinking about recently during the debates about whether we ban TikTok or not here in the United States is, you could plausibly have in a year or so an engineer use a large language model to just, as soon as an app is blocked, ask an LLM to code a copy of the platform and release a new version of the app within minutes. We're living in a world where that's in flux. And so an important question to ask is, how do you build longevity? And when I say longevity, I don't just mean for us as people. I think we all want to find ways to stay relevant, to stay current, to stay as entrepreneurs, as innovators. But it's our products too, right? Products that break through public policy as well. Longevity actually is a North Star. And so one of the things that I think about, and I've kind of been dancing around this as well, it's, one simple way to think about this is that computing and commercial skills are increasingly available. That's not to say that everybody, I don't mean to diminish the importance and sophistication around commercial education and computing education, but I learn a lot on YouTube about neural networks, just as much as I learn about how to drive efficacy out of CRM platforms I use as part of a sales process. There's a lot out there. And I guess one answer I want to offer to you all today is, which is informing my work here at Virginia Tech, is the humanities actually, and the liberal arts might actually have a uniquely important role to play in the future of innovation and entrepreneurship, not just here at Virginia Tech, at the CRC, but around the world. And I think part of what I want to offer to you all is that this has been true for a long time, as you'll see already. In fact, what I'm trying to do here at Virginia Tech is give a name to something that has been kind of nameless for a long time. Now, a lot of people ask me, what are the humanities? Rishi, you're standing up here and saying that the humanities have a role to play in game-changing innovation. What the heck are the humanities? Should we all have been English majors, philosophy majors? What are you talking about? And so I decided a year ago to write a poem. There's the poem, 6-word poem, to describe what I mean by the humanities. In my mind, the humanities are all, any and all serious, sustained education or experience that anchors you in human others. Now, what kind of a world do we live in today? I used to work at Twitter. And I think companies like Twitter have propagated what I call a culture of mirrors. We live in a culture of mirrors. What does that mean? We live in a culture that's short form and self-involved. I've been a part of that. And that's just, it is what it is. What the humanities do, though, is offer all of us, I think, a culture of windows, long form and other centric. And I think the more we can cultivate the muscles of thinking in the long form and in other centric ways, not only do we live more fulfilling lives, we're better innovators. We're better user researchers. We're better sales executives. We're better entrants into new markets. We're better thinkers about competitive dynamics in an ecosystem. We're better at game changing, actually. Now, when you think about the humanities, you know, a bunch of my buddies who are far, far away from higher ed, when I bring up the humanities, they have kind of an allergic reaction. They say, what are you talking about? How could you be working on the humanities? Because the narrative around the humanities is not at all what I'm describing, right? The headlines around the humanities seem to suggest that the disciplines and the import of these fields are in decline. This is the cover of the New Yorker about a year and a half ago, talking about the end of the English major and how English departments and history departments around the world are in decline, and frankly, some of them closing because no one's majoring in these fields. When I was in college, English and history were among the most popular majors. But, you know, it's really funny when you look at these pieces that describe the decline and irrelevance of the humanities. There are nuggets of wisdom in these pieces. You don't have to read this whole thing, but what this passage really gets at is Arizona State has a partnership with Starbucks, wherein mid-career professionals at Starbucks get an opportunity to study at Arizona State and get a degree or credential of their choice. And a disproportionate number of them actually choose credentials in and around the humanities, which is interesting. People in the middle of their careers who've experienced the reality of life and experienced in the real world what it takes to break through aren't running back to university to study commercial and computing skills. They're studying other things. This is an article in The Economist a year ago that was trying to narrate what are students at Stanford Business School studying. What are the most popular courses at one of the world's preeminent business schools, where presumably leaders of game-changing innovation are right now? It turns out that none of the top 3 courses at Stanford Business School have anything to do with traditional business quantitative skills and sensibilities. The most popular courses there are all in and around what you might call fuzzy skills, the skills of negotiation, the skills of diplomacy, the skills of introspection. And so under the hood, there are these signals in the marketplace that game-changing innovation actually is more complicated than taking a class on innovation. There's something else at work. And so this is sort of the beginning of what animated me in my journey. I studied history in college, and that's my only degree. And I had this kind of career in and around innovation. And one of the things I noticed in my own career was, a lot of the most inspired leaders and founders and innovators I came across weren't necessarily more technically capable or spreadsheet ninja than their counterparts. They were being promoted and had breakthrough ideas for some other reason I couldn't quite put a pin on. And what I came to learn was that there's been a Silicon Valley secret that's been true for decades. This slide always shocks many people, but it's true. We all know about Steve Jobs and his embrace of the humanities and his notion that Apple lives on liberal arts avenue and technology street. But here are other examples, and this is just the tip of the iceberg, of how many other entrepreneurs around the world have committed themselves, not just in what they majored, but their graduate degrees and others, to the liberal arts. In other words, investing in the muscles of game changing, which are which come before the act of game changing. And I couldn't believe, as I thought about this, that these ideas, this truth, didn't have a name. These all existed backstage. And so that's in part why I came to Virginia Tech. I came here to kind of frame up for really the world this truth and frankly interrogate it further, right? I don't mean to suggest this is a silver bullet. I don't mean to suggest this is you study blank and Y happens. I mean to suggest that it's a part of the puzzle. And it's long been a missing part of the equation. And so I came here to ask these questions, and a lot of people ask me, well, these are interesting questions. I'm with you so far, Rishi. But what is it about this part of the country that is particularly conducive for birthing and the question and answer here? I actually think that this university and this region is both fuzzy and techie. This is another book I'd recommend. A buddy of mine from Google wrote this book, which helped give a lot of these concepts a name. I think we're both fuzzy and techie. And part of what I'm trying to offer in the research I'm doing here and the program I'm running is that both matter. And both matter, not just in one's interior life, but one's industrial life as well. I think Virginia Tech in this region, of course, we have technical heritage, but we're a soulful place. We're a place, and we've got a public service spirit about us. And I think when you put it all together, you actually get, apologies for the formatting here, blame the Google Slides to PowerPoint transition. We've got a place that's both fuzzy and techie. And what you'll notice, my framing around leadership and technology, I don't use the word humanities. I intentionally think that part of what I've sort of designed is something that can meet the market where it's at. If I called my institute the Institute for More Humanities in the world, no one would care. But leadership is a product people are readily curious about, and technology. I think we can all agree that technology has a disproportionate effect on our culture, from political polarization to mental health and the like. The leadership market has been dominated for about a century by business schools and public policy schools. You go to the website of any business school, and many here might be, which is great. They use the language of leadership. And in many ways, I started to think, well, I think this marketplace that one might call leadership and leadership education and leadership experiences could use a new entrant, and that entrant being the humanities. And I get bombarded all the time with sort of executive education sort of ads and content. A lot of people ask me, especially since I took on this role at OpenAI, what do I think about this or that policy issue, or this or that, negative downside of AI issue, right? I get asked those questions all the time. I guess my answer to the question often stems from, I guess what animates me most is who's in the room where these things are happening and what experiences are they bringing to bear. I feel strongly that we can talk ad nauseum about the issues around AI and content and copyright, the issues around AI and misinformation, disinformation, the issue around AI and Western bias versus a globally inclusive spirit. But ultimately, having been in a lot of these rooms over the decades and seeing how random and human these people are not waking up with grand plans to take over the world. They are fallible dudes. That ensuring the people in those rooms are coming with a wide set of experiences and not siloed swim lanes in which their North Stars are dim is more important. And the good news is I'm not the only one beginning to make this case, right? So there are certainly headwinds around the story I'm telling around the importance of the humanities, but others I think are awakening to this as well. And so you will find others besides me, protagonists who sort of try to make the case around these issues. This might be my favorite slide of the day, those of you taking pictures. One way to think about this is, we in technology and innovation sometimes think in terms of stacks, right? We think of the front end, the back end, the OS, the hardware, APIs, and the like. What stack are you building programming on? Well, here's a question I'm asking. What does the full stack human of the future look like? In many ways, what I've started here at Virginia Tech is a full stack human institute, right? And one way to answer the question is the top of the stack of a full stack human is going to be the applied layer, which is to say, it will always be important for all of us to be current around today's trends, right? This talk 2 or 3 or 4 years ago might have centered on Web3. You know, 2, 3, 4 years before that might have centered on Web 2, and on and on and on. Meaning today, generative AI seems to be what a lot of folks are coalescing around, but in 5 years, it may not be. This talk may be more, you know, you might want to anchor in quantum this or quantum that, or who knows? We can't foresee. So the applied layer of the stack is undoubtedly an area where we all ought to stay current and stay fresh. That and our culture is already over-rotated there, right? We as people, survival instincts and the like, of course, we're going to stay current. But what constitutes the infrastructure layer of the stack of that full stack human? And my argument or my hypothesis is that the liberal arts and the humanities can play an intriguing role in the infrastructure layer of the full stack human. So as Laura mentioned, I started this institute here at Virginia Tech. I'll now finish by just telling you what it is, and then we can have a conversation if you'd like. The framing around this institute is to advance a new kind of leadership literacy, one that offers rising stars in the world's tech landscape a humanities credential as a way to grow their leadership experience, and frankly, a humanities oriented network of people. And our framing is anchored in the framing around my talk, what's the superpower of the future? And we offer a 1-year fellowship to people from around the world to come. It's mostly virtual, but some in-person experiences in Virginia and elsewhere in the United States. We recruited a really cool network of honorary advisors from around the world who are part of our experience. On this list here includes a senior executive at Canva, the CEO of Stack Overflow. Some of you guys probably are familiar with Stack Overflow. The CEO of Stack Overflow, Prashant, is an honorary advisor on our board, and a wonderful affirmation of the importance of the humanities in technology. And I'm proud to say that last year we welcomed our first class to this institute, the class of 2024. We had executives from 4 countries and many companies, including Amazon, Boeing, and Microsoft. And think about this. These are senior people from Ireland, Mexico, the United States, India, who work at companies, have bully pulpits, are doing well, running big P&Ls. All of them paid money, come to Virginia Tech to study English, history, creative writing, philosophy, religion, and more, because they sense that that's how they're going to break through and stay fresh and invest in the infrastructure layer of their careers. And so we had the quick summary of the program is we had a launch in Blacksburg, kind of an in-person experience in Blacksburg. We run seminars on the history of human leadership over millennia, on faith, scripture, and variety of texts. There's independent work. We have a field trip we do that last year we did to Miami to explore what happens to places that embrace the arts. What happens to innovation ecosystems like Miami that also prioritize the arts. And then we had courses on creative writing and the applied humanities, in April, creative work, and then kind of a fun graduation. That's Gene Case, one of the early employees of AOL, who spoke at our kind of mini graduation. And so, I'll leave you again with this idea of full stack human. And I hope some of this is a valuable contribution to your thinking about how game changing happens. I'll actually just close by giving you a quick preview of what's happening this year and with the program, and then I'll stop. So I'm proud to say that we're just finished admitting our class of 2025. We've got an executive, to get this, from TikTok, a senior executive from TikTok in the UK who runs global sales for the company in our program. This is someone who, arguably oversees portions of a company that many think is not good for humanity. Coming to Virginia Tech to study the humanities as a way to complicate his notion of what constitutes not just leadership, but stewardship. And we've got executives from Citibank and Zillow and elsewhere also joining our class of 2025. And I think this reveals a lot about our moment, about a lot what people in the real world are feeling around the future of innovation and entrepreneurship. And I think that my hope is that there's going to be similar programs like this around the country. Sometimes I still can't believe there isn't another one. And I think over time we'll go well beyond tech executives. My dream is for humanities experiences to not just reside with the few, but with the many. So you could imagine policymakers, senators, legislators, young people, old people, all experiencing the common ground of the humanities in interesting ways, and we'll do our part to keep sharing. So, all right, hope that was helpful. Thank you for having me. Happy to hang around for conversation. Yep.
So this is an executive leadership program. Are you connecting with the students here at Tech in any way? Do you have any students that work with you or can see this program so that it starts them to appreciate the humanities as they go through their career and not just?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've had a lot of students write, just because this program just seems cool. And so I've gotten a lot of the high school students write, I've had undergraduates write, I've participated in some humanities programs at correctional facilities in Virginia. I've had healthcare systems write me, say, hey, we'd love to bring humanities education into the medical care and palliative care experience. So big picture, lots of people have written. And I pretty much say yes to anyone that wants to write and get to know and find ways to collaborate. I think for undergraduates in particular, I think this raises some interesting questions, right? Because part of the argument I try not to make is that you got to major in the humanities. I think that's a losing argument. Who am I to say what a 17 or 18-year-old should dedicate her or himself to study? That's a separate discussion. But my frame is that a lifelong commitment to these disciplines in whatever way it might manifest is a prerequisite to enduring game changing. That's the story I tell. And so that tends to go better for undergraduates who may not feel they're ready to, kind of declare a major in and around the humanities. This has also sort of provoked some interesting conversations with, folks at Virginia Tech around, should we be offering not just majors and minors in the humanities, but other kinds of bite-sized experiences and credentials that are a bit more breezy, that give people a more accessible window into the liberal arts in a way that maybe a major or minor feels too heavy. And so those are all early stage conversations. And I'm part of what I'm, because I'm not a trained academic, I don't really care about departments and tenure and all that. I have no dog in the fight. I don't, I came here by choice. Part of what I try to tell fellow faculty members is, you think in 50-year terms, it is already the case today that I, on YouTube, learn a lot of what you teach, right? So can you imagine what a university is going to look like in the year 2074? And if we don't get ahead of these trends now, we're sort of, it's lame not to ask these questions now. And so I think finding novel ways to meet young people where they are and give them a humanities experience that feels current, where you're connecting the dots to today's leadership, I found is resonant. And we'll see what we might be able to structure for undergraduates, but in the meantime, we're, informally spending as much time as we can with them. Yeah.
I'm a business coach and some of my teams are engineer heavy. I'll be dealing with 30-somethings.
Yeah.
Who engineer in there. Now they're on a leadership team.
Yeah.
And I'll characterize it as mitigating your strengths.
Yeah.
The thing that made you such a great, that got you here is not gonna, those strengths are not helping you as much as they used to.
Yeah, interesting.
Have you pick engineers, whoever you want,
Yeah,
they're at the tipping point.
right.
Have you seen any trends in what gives them the aha moment? I need to mitigate my strengths.
That's really powerful framing. I actually hadn't heard that before around this moment in your career where your strength actually is kind of a diminishing return, right? Which is sort of what you're getting at. A few reflections in response to your question. One is, one of the things we try to do in our program, and it's a big debate, is how pragmatic and practical to make a program like this. So a lot of people say, well, Rishi, here, I'm doing a creative writing paper for you. I'm reading, sacred texts from the Eastern Hemisphere. I'm a TikTok executive. I run 7-figure budgets at Amazon. What does this have to do with my Monday meeting? Right? Why am I doing this? And I think part of what we try to say is you have to trust. We actually don't intentionally ask people to connect the dots between the experience of diving into human others through the humanities and what that does to their performance review 6 months down the line. So that's one, it may not be the right approach, but it's the approach we're trying. And one of the things I found is in the last year is that the students on their own will find ways to say, gosh, this text I'm reading from 9th century China around military leadership in that part of the world and a young soldier reflecting and lamenting a culture of warfare and a lack of values or whatever the text says. It reminds me so much of the debates we have at our weekly management team meeting around values and action and inaction. And so we kind of let things bubble up, actually. So the power of self-discovery is something that we tend to have trusted in our program. I think most people that come to our, I think we've experienced a range. We had a rocket scientist from Boeing, an engineer, obviously, who had never taken a humanities course. And so for her, our course was, the aha was immediate, which is I've never taken an English class. I've never invested in writing. I'm bad at writing. I'm bad at public speaking, Rishi. I need to get better at it. It was quite functional for her. And the journey for her in even a year was steep. We conclude our program with a big showcase in Washington, DC. We're in front of 200 people. Each one of these executives offer a big speech around their last year. And here's someone who says she can't speak and very shy. Whereas for other people, so for her, it was clearly a mitigator of strength. There are other people that came to the program whose strengths clearly lied in this space, but who lacked the nourishment of a tribe and a feeling seen. And I'm sort of probably more one of those, right? I'm kind of by temperament more of a humanities person, but I felt alone throughout my career, right? Because to my right was an MBA, to my left was a doctorate in engineering, and I was like, who am I? Like, how do I belong? And for me, this labor of love in many ways is a way to ensure people like this have a tribe too. And for them, it was actually quite nourishing just to finally feel like they've got a stage. So it runs the gamut on people maybe over investing in their strengths versus others mitigating their strengths. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your fantastic view on this topic. I was intrigued by your term place-based work,
Yeah.
place-based leadership, because I'm a geographer, so
There you
place
go.
is closely related to me, my expert. So would
Amazing.
you mind telling me more about that place-based leadership or place-based work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I love that you work in geography. I mean, I think that there's the personal version of the answer, and then there's the kind of programmatic version of the answer. Personally speaking, I've always been wired for place-based work. So when I'm in and around Silicon Valley, where people tend to build from California for the world abstractly, right? People tend to think that my product here will travel around the world. And I don't need to think in terms of what does this place need? What does this market need? What does this demographic segment need? I've never been one of those. That's why I left Silicon Valley a few different times, because I wanted to reside in localism and translate for product managers the different ways in which users receive products depending on the country. And so I just personally always find more satisfaction when I'm wired into localism. That's the personal nature of the answer, and there's more to share there. And so a lot of my work across sectors has been place-based, and it's part of why I love being here, because there's a clear sense of place here. Programmatically, one of the things we're learning is that leadership, when you're trying to teach people leadership, it's important to, one helpful frame is that companies are a place, right? They are a community of people, often these days spread digitally, sure, but maybe sometimes there's hybrid setups. There are places with a defined culture, set of values, a set of, citizens, so to speak, right? And when you think about companies as places, it actually, my students have found to be a helpful way to feel and cultivate ownership of the place, right? When you think in terms of places, you use the language of citizenship, you use the language of engagement, you use the language of activism, you use the language of stewardship, of taking care, of responsibility. And so that's been a big aha moment. So what have we done? A lot of our readings and work anchors not just in leadership abstractly. What did the CEO of GE do in 1985 on some global problem? I mean, that's too abstract. We tend to think in terms of place. What was a leader wrestling with in a community? And then finally, we travel. We visit places and see what happens in those places when the arts are lifted up. So I think geography is a really interesting way to think about and learn about leadership and things like that. I also happen to think that if you think in 20-year terms, the world will be even more virtual. People that have a sense of place, I think, are gonna stand out more, right? Because otherwise, I just think it's a way to come across as authentic. And I've certainly found that in my career. Yeah.
My name is Glenn. I'm actually a product manager based in Silicon Valley.
Oh my God.
And,
Wow, perfect.
You just mentioned that you help product managers
Yeah.
think about like how to build from more of a global perspective versus just, building in a silo in
Yeah.
San Francisco somewhere. And I was just wondering, what are some tips or advice that you could give me to think about that global perspective as we launch new features and new products that I'm working on?
I love it. Well, you're already, I mean, just by virtue of being here, you're already way ahead of the curve on these questions. I mean, so there's a traditional way to think about this, and then there's sort of, maybe something that's more unconventional, right? So the traditional stuff is to sit outside of your function within your company and spend a lot of time with marketers, with international sales executives, with user research teams, and get a feel for what folks outside of product, how they see the world around how a product grows, right? I mean, product managers, what I found is that each function tends to think that their button is the most powerful on the growth flywheel, right? So the product people are like, no, but when we change the product this way, that's why growth skyrocketed. The marketers feel that when we launch that campaign, that's why growth skyrocketed. I would, as a first step, make sure to sit cross-functionally as much as you can. And I imagine you're already doing that. The second thing I would do is study building a habit in one's media diet of use cases in other markets for similar or adjacent products is really, so I'm not familiar what product you work on, but one magazine I'd encourage you to read is a magazine called Rest of World, restofworld.org. And all they do every day is chronicle innovation ecosystems outside the Western bubble. So every day you'll get an email from them around what digital products are being consumed in Lagos and Tel Aviv and Johannesburg and in Burma and Rio and Peru and Lima. What are people consuming? And you all may not have international global ambitions, but finding in your media diet opportunities to sit with product innovation ecosystems that feel far, I think is just a really helpful muscle. This is less about, in our culture, we kind of want the quick dopamine of how does this help me tomorrow? This is more about, cultivating muscles that will help you in surprising ways down the line. And then finally, the best product managers I have come across and leaders are those that are just perpetually curious about other cultures in ways that have nothing to do with technology. So, I've lived abroad a few times in my career, and the best product executives say, hey, Rishi, I'm coming to Japan to visit you. I'm coming to Singapore to visit you, coming to India to visit you. What book should I read? I'm like, you mean a tech book? No, not tech. Like, give me a feel for the place, right? I want to read about the culture and its evolution and its history. So I feel sharper in conversations with engineers or with designers. So, there's sort of different altitudes at which to work at, but I'd encourage, concurrently tracking on all three.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Working with a lot of executives, is a two-part question. First is from the humanities side or the underlying mechanisms of those, where do you feel the biggest gap is today? And so that it could be the functional group or it could be like empathy or communication skills. And then especially with what you're doing here, but even expanded upon that, where do you see the greatest spark for joy or the greatest light bulb moment for these guys?
Wow. Great questions. Well, going backwards, funnily enough, I feel like the biggest aha moment and like sense of excitement, and if I'm looking back on our curriculum, came from creative writing course. A lot of our fellows, of course, love the idea of studying philosophy and history and religion, but gosh, when they got to creative writing and got to experience really crazy texts and poems and sort of subverted stories, and then got to playfully, write their own short story. I found that to be kind of a moment of therapy for these otherwise busy executives and a moment of courage and growth. So I'd say kind of joy is probably where I feel there. In terms of the biggest gaps, I think that's a really interesting question because you're right, the humanities do a lot, right? They fuel introspection, imagination, empathy, expression, communication, speaking, storytelling, story listening. I mean, I think for most of our folks, it's, probably the long form attention span and long form communication. That was probably what most, drew them to the work. I'd also add that philosophy as a genre felt like an area where a lot of people really enjoyed some exposure to. Philosophy as a genre on its own has been known to have a disproportionate number of people in and around technology and innovation running toward it, in part because of its emphasis on logic and rational thought and kind of ways in which to understand how the universe works. So I think in a weird way, it's sort of both sides of the brain. You have a lot of people just there to, expand their right brain, but then the magic of philosophy and how it trains you to actually think with even more precision in a linear way was also a gap that many addressed.
And on the creative writing, the growth oriented transformative mindset or the vulnerability or both?
Another great question. Yeah, I mean, I think it'd certainly be both, but you're right to flag. I didn't share it in my response. A lot of it, and a lot of what I found even in my career is that, vulnerable communication these days is rare, right? I mean, even in a sales meeting, right? I mean, so I think the permission to be even somewhat vulnerable, I think was probably half the battle. I've definitely found in my career, having been in venture capital and been in big tech sales and been an entrepreneur, is that no one has ever bought my product because it was rationally better. But I think I sold these things in ways that felt authentic and even vulnerable. And I think a lot of rising leaders are looking for the permission to be that way. And good on you for flagging that. Man, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you guys for your engagement and looking forward to staying in touch. Thank you.
Yeah, and still, he's on the panel coming up, so please stay for that, for the lunch and learn. And I still have tons of questions to ask you.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't get to ask mine. But if you haven't checked in with me for this session, can you let me know too, so I can get your name? And we are getting ready to start our lunch and learn coming up too. So if you plan on staying for that, also check in with me. But thank you so much, Rishi. I really appreciate it.
Is that lunch and learn also here?
Yes.